Welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi there, I'm Kevin Horrigan, host of the show. I feature inspiring leaders from various backgrounds and industries who are willing to share their experience and insights. Today's podcast is brought to you by Spinutech. Spinutech is a digital advertising agency catering to the middle market and larger to help those companies grow. At Spinutech, we have an end-to-end digital process that starts with perfecting your company's website, making sure it speaks the right language, attracts people's attention and interest, and accelerates them to want to take action to become a prospect of your business or a client. We then complement that with all the digital advertising tactics to grow your business through accelerating more traffic to your website, accelerating interest of people, and helping you become more successful with your whole digital presence. You can learn more about getting more leads from Spinutech at www.spinutech.com. That's spin, the letter U, tech.com. Thank you, Spinutech, for your partnership today. Today's guest is Dean Mavrikos. He is the Channel Growth Manager at Kentico Software. Dean started with the company in June 2021 as a business development representative. In August of 2022, Dean took on the role of Director of Business Development for North America. In Dean's new role as business development leader, he had been hiring and training a team of business development representatives. With all of that success, last July, Dean stepped into the role of Channel Growth Manager, working and supporting a wide array of implementation partners throughout North America. In addition to his role at Kentico, Dean has a passion for personal and professional growth and dedicated to life with his wife and two children. He's an avid sports fan, fitness enthusiast, enjoys coaching his son's flag football team, and I'm super excited to hear about your passion for personal and professional growth and how that can contribute today on the Growth Buyer Podcast. Dean, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, Dean, we got to know each other over the last couple of years and super excited for maybe to introduce yourselves to our audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what did little Dean want to be when he grew up, and maybe a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So, I grew up in a really small town in Massachusetts. So, as you alluded to, an avid sports fan, and this might rub some people the wrong way, but I'm a Boston sports fan through and through. So I've grew up in a time where I got to see a lot of success. If you ask my old man what his kind of views on that were, the Patriots and the Red Sox, a little bit different. But I'm the youngest of three boys, two loving parents, grew up in a wonderful home. I spent my summers down on Cape Cod. And I guess growing up, being an avid sports fan, that was really all I was about. I was about going to school and playing sports, and that was it. And, my dad worked in business. Both my older brothers kind of went that route. And, when I went to college in Connecticut, I got into the business school. And I don't know if I should admit this or not, but I will. So it got towards the end of my sophomore year where they start putting the pressure on you. You got to declare a major here, kid.
Major.
And so I started talking to some people that I knew were successful in business, and I kind of let them know my situation. And I got some guidance around, well, if you're not exactly sure what to do, make sure that you choose something that's broad enough, but hard enough that when you go into an interview, they think you didn't party for 4 years.
Right.
So I chose economics, which I thought was challenging enough and broad enough that could be applied everywhere. And looking back, I think at least it was a wise decision.
Yeah, no, I think if the advice is to pick something that looked as if you're disciplined enough that didn't think you party for 4 years, economics was definitely on the more robust side of things of what you could have chosen to check that box. So you grew up avid sports fan. I'm sorry, it happened to be for the Boston teams. Kidding. But you grew up avid sports fan and went to school not knowing what you want to do. You get a degree in economics. But how have you applied that to the impressive sales leadership career that you've had so far today?
So ironically, I ended up using it in finance. And so my first job out of school was working for a company that was in the exchange traded fund business. And so the first portion of that, the first couple months of that was going back to school. Honestly, it was studying for the Series 7. It was studying for the Series 63. Luckily, I passed both of those on my first go. And so more or less what they said was, congratulations, you passed. There's a phone, go pick it up and start dialing.
Right.
And so there was a lot of baptism by fire through that process. And my job, initially in kind of that entry level role was calling some of the smaller financial shops. Right. And so, they're managing a book of business. I had kind of a threshold that I needed to stay below. And so my job was to create relationships with those brokerage teams to try and get a slice of that portfolio coming towards our ETF. So I was a wholesaler. That's exactly what I was. And so I did that in that entry level role for a while. And then after about maybe a year and a half or so, they called me up from, I was working down in their small office in Quincy. They called me up to the headquarters in Boston. And so I'm working in the financial district, and I'm calling on the wirehouses, the bigger firms. And then they actually started giving me some of the private banks as well. And I think what happened was when I was in college, I did an internship at a brokerage firm. And then I actually ended up going back and doing, those are the days when you got 5 weeks off for winter break. I miss those days. And so I actually went back because I enjoyed it so much, and luckily they had me back. And I think that's really what's kind of sparked my interest. And ultimately I worked there for about 4 years. And really what was going to change then was moving somewhere else in the country, being kind of an outside wholesaler and being on the road all the time. And there was that, it kind of coupled with some other things that I thought I wanted to, life was kind of pulling me in a different direction. And so I actually ultimately ended up leaving finance. I never went back. So I've worked in sales in a lot of different industries. I've worked, quasi healthcare, like kind of working with some treatment centers and working with hospitals and things like that. I've worked on point of sale systems for restaurants and some credit card processing. And so to me, sales is sales. It doesn't really matter what the widget is, so to speak. And then, ultimately I kind of hit this crossroads in my life, and, I got a wife and I got a family and some children. And I'm thinking, okay, so what are we going to do here? Let's kind of buckle down and see, and I had some success in those roles and was making comfortable enough money, but I knew that if I wanted to really get on the trajectory I'm looking for, I wanted to take a step back and take a macro look at where I wanted to go. And I came up with the difficult decision. So through some research, I decided to take a step back with the hopes that I would make 2 steps forward. And Kevin, I'm pleased to say that today that's come to fruition. And so I took a step back and got in. I got my foot in the door as a BDR. Here I am again, cold calling and doing this thing again. And I knew that I wanted to get into this space because it was from the research I saw, at least it was increasing at an increasing rate, and I just wanted to be a part of it. And so that's what happened. I got in and they brought me in, and I had to pay my dues and I had to learn. And I'm pleased to say that this is where I'm sitting now, and I'm happy to kind of walk through that. But I'm really happy with the decision I made.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that story, Dean. That's, it's very insightful. I think there's a lot of people who, are looking for career advice, and they may have felt they've gone too far down one path, that there's not a linear step that could just come off and go on to another ladder, so to speak, and go up in a different career. And, sometimes you have to take one step backward to take 2 steps forward. And it's, have you done the right amount of research? Can you plan your work your plan, and will yield you to the outcome of where you expect? And I'm happy to hear you share that it's worked for you, and, sharing that insight with others who are listening to the Growth Fire podcast. I think that is, the journey that some people have to take. And here's somebody who's sitting, on this podcast right now, who's had successful at it and seemed very excited. You had a big smile on your face, a lot of positive energy, and hopefully you're inspiring others who are at that crossroads right now, that not sure if their first career choice was the right one. It's not too late to consider making a change.
And just as a caveat to that, I rolled the dice, and there was a lot of fear, like, am I making the right choice? And another kind of funny story too, because it's funny, I was a little earlier today, I was talking to one of the BDRs here at our company that just started, and just asking for some advice and things and that. And so I said, listen, when I came into this business, I knew less than nothing about this. And, the running joke that I told to the business development reps that I hired and trained, I said, the first 2 things I taught them, I said, I'm going to tell you this story first. The first one is that I would, for the first 4 or 5 months, Kevin, that I started this company, I'd come home and my wife would say, do you have any idea what you guys do yet? Nope. How are you still meeting your number? And it's like, well, there's an art to it. There's an art to booking meetings, to getting to, not having to have all the answers every time in the business development role. That's not my job. My job is not to have the answers. My job is to then take those questions, understand them to the best of my ability, and provide that meeting to the next person who can get that done. And that was my role. And I kept my eyes on the prize from that standpoint. Yes. Luckily, I was able to sit on a lot of those calls and grasp a lot of that information and learn from them.
Yep.
But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. I failed a lot. There was a lot of times where, there's days or even a week at a time where I'm just getting rejection after rejection after rejection. And that kind of segues into the second thing that I taught all of the business development reps that I hired. I said, we do not get paid for yeses. You get paid for the nos. Yeah. How much rejection can you take and keep moving forward?
Yep.
Because there's going to be days where it feels like you're banging your head against the wall because it feels good to stop.
Right.
But let's change that perspective. And the perspective on that is for every no that you get, you're getting closer to a yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And you shared that story when we were together last time. And I was going to ask you to bring up the story. I didn't remember word by word, but I'm so glad you just shared that, because I think you said, summary wise, is the success in sales isn't the yeses you get, but it's the volume of no's, and every no is one step closer to your next yes. And to not get frustrated with the no's, just learn as part of the process and perfect your way to make the less number of no's, but no's is part of the process, and making your way through the no's is a faster way to get to the yeses.
Mm-hmm.
Not giving up. And it's so, and we measure sales here internally at Spinutech as well. And some of the things that we realized looking maybe at our own metrics, or maybe some of our clients too, when we sometimes could track, how one particular division or unit of maybe a client's performance performed better. And sometimes it's not the leads were better, it's the way the approach was taken with those leads and the follow-up, and where the reduction of contacts, frequency, and all that stuff starts to slide away from one group. The group that's more tenacious with it has more success.
I completely agree. It's funny you bring up the word tenacious, because that brings me back to your original question of, why did I want to get into sales? And I remember just as a small boy, my mother still tells me the story that she said, that kid's going into sales. He's about as tenacious as a kid as I've ever met. And I'm sure that probably drove her nuts. But just to kind of expand upon the second point there is, yes, there's a degree of rejection that you need to be okay with and not take it personally. Yes. However, if it's going on and on and on and on, there might be something wrong with the process and the approach too. So it's not just a matter of doing that's the old Einstein, definition of insanity. We're doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And so, there was still a good amount of process and analysis that I took on the calls. And I was always listening to other people's calls or podcasts. When I go and work out in the morning, a lot of times I'll throw on some sort of podcast around sales or business development or whatever it was. And then also it started to lead to a point where I was leading to podcasts on how do you now transition from the BDR to the account executive, which is what I've done. And so what I did in that process was two things. One, I definitively made it very clear that is the path very early on that I wanted to go. But I also made it very clear that I don't have a timeline on what that looks like, and that I'm more than willing to be patient and pay my dues to learn this business, so that when I do get to that point, there's going to be a degree of success there. And so I think that's a really clear distinction, because I believe in meritocracy. And so I needed to earn that. And so by earning that, that means that the job that I had as a business development rep, I had to do to the best of my ability and set up as many good quality meetings. And in the beginning, Kevin, I set up some bad meetings. I set up some bad meetings. And I learned from them. And because I would call the rep after and say, why was that a bad meeting? And I'd learn, and I would make sure to not repeat that. And so that's something that I took, and then I trained other guys and girls on how to do. Yeah. And so ultimately, after I got that team in place, I said, okay, are we ready to do this? And so they moved me up here.
No, that's great stories to share as well. You mentioned, part of your routine and just being better at what you do was, going to the gym, and also, maybe listening to podcasts. You definitely, lead a very healthy, mentally, physically lifestyle. How is that part of your strategy to be better in your career as a leader in the sales area?
I'm a big proponent of meditation. So I get up at 5:00 every morning, weekends included. And before the wife's up, before the kids are going nuts, and I just sit in silence for a while. And we talk about all those different thoughts, whether they are distorted thinking or they're real thinking, whatever it is, it's thinking. And I think it's taking me out of the present moment. And so what meditation has done for me is it's transformed my relationship with my thinking.
Yes.
And what that allows me to do is apply that to every single area of my life. So that's how I start off with kind of my spiritual approach in the morning, is that quiet time in silence, sitting with self, which can be challenging.
Yep.
And then from there, it's getting the kids ready, getting them off, all that. And then it's going and getting that workout in. And then it's, okay, so I've had my time of mental, spiritual, and physical well-being. Now it's time to have the next 8 or plus hours of really hard work. And that's how I'm going to compartmentalize this.
Yep.
And then when work is over, it's leaving work behind, and it's going to be a dad. It's going to be a husband. It's going to be a coach. It's going to be plug and play, whatever that looks like. And so that awareness and that mindfulness around those types of practices. And this is all things that have been taught to me. So I can't really take a whole lot of credit. What I can take credit for is that on a day-by-day basis, I've been making an effort to do it. And so I think that meditation, some people say meditation's been going so great, like this is awesome. And then I say, it'll pass. And then they're like, well, meditation's going terrible. Like, I don't know, it'll pass. And I think that's the same thing with anything else in life. Hot streaks, cold streaks, somewhere in between, it all applies.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate you sharing that story. Sounds very disciplined in what you do and seems to be very working. Is there ever a time where the discipline breaks? What happens? You have a weak day, want to share any of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So routines are great until life happens. And so, there'll be times where I'm up and I hear my baby crying and I have to go get him. So like life's a little bit delayed, but the practice of it, I think even just making the effort of it, it's opened my eyes to the fact that I could look at this at one of two ways. One, I could be upset at the fact that my baby's, he's disturbing my me time. What is this? Right. Or I'm really grateful that like I get to go be a dad right now and go kind of take care of him. And so like that's that perspective change. And I think it applies to sales because you're having a tough week. Well, let's look at it and see, well, how can I look at that differently? What can I change in my approach? How can I start looking at this in a more optimistic way? And so again, I just think that, there are days where I'm not perfect. There are days where my thinking gets the best of me and I can take things personally. And I think what meditation has allowed is that with those bad moments no longer turn into bad days.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I appreciate you sharing that. Let's switch gears on, sure. Dean, how you actually implement this. So maybe ask you a couple questions here. So, who's the market that you go after? Who's your target market? Yeah. And then maybe, how do you go after, approaching that target market to try to introduce your brand to try to onboard new clients?
Yep. So we are truly a global company. Our headquarters are over in the Czech Republic, actually. And so our target market is really kind of the upper mid-market to lower enterprise and really vertical agnostic. So you'll see us represented in really every single vertical. I would say we're more heavily represented in some of the manufacturing, the banking and credit union, some of the finance stuff, to a certain degree, some of the hospitals and some nonprofits and associations. And so I think what we've always kind of differentiated ourselves on is we take a very solution first or solution oriented first approach to everything. We are not a incredibly heavy sales organization. We actually take a lot of so we've been private profit funded since our inception in 2004. A lot of times what we do with those profits is we put them back into developers to make sure that the solution is as affable to everyone. I think another thing that separates us is that the previous iterations of Kentico up into our latest launch has been a culmination of feedback from end clients and partners. And so we really wouldn't be here, honestly, without our partner network. And, we do a lot of our own individual marketing, PPC, we go to events, we do all kind of the traditional stuff, but at the end of the day, we're a vendor. And so we wouldn't be in business without our partner network. We wouldn't be in business without partners like Spinutech. So we rely on them to make it a very true and genuine and honest partnership to go and co-sell and make sure that we are working together and collaborating for the best use case for the end client. And I think that, that is really where our bread and butter is making sure. And that's really what my role is to work with those partners and ensure that they have everything they need from our standpoint to ensure that they are successful. And when you're successful, the end client's successful as well.
Yep. So well articulated. So you rely heavily on some trusted partners who who you're perfecting a software product that they can go out and market to however they want to go out and acquire customers.
Mhm.
What appears to be the middle market, this lower enterprise, vertically agnostic target market, but you're perfecting a solution and providing the support and that so partners can leverage that for what they may already have pre-existing relationships for or abilities to go out and market directly to the brands you're seeking, but through a partner network and growing Kentico as a result of a great partner channel, complemented by some of the other marketing as well. But the partner channel is a big part of the initiative.
It is. And, there's over 11,000 MarTech solutions that are currently out there and growing. Where does somebody start? Well, typically they're going to go to an agency to start with that, right? And so if they're going that route, then it would behoove us to have that insight and that kind of relationship with. And so, again, taking the feedback that we've seen from some of the clients and partners, some interesting stats have kind of come to light, right? So if you take a look at some of the stats, like over 50% of marketers are saying that they're maintaining at least 3 primary websites. And 64% of those marketers are saying that they're using at least 2 content management or digital experience platform solutions. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes there. And that can lead to a challenge for them, but an opportunity for us. And so that consolidated type of, we're not something for everybody. We're just not. But there are certain situations like those where they're saying, we have too many systems in place. We're finding this hard to manage. We're finding this hard to get in and actually make sure that we're producing the type of content that we want to our target audience because we're working with so many different systems, learning different systems, bouncing back and forth. There's no uniformity between them. How can we go about that? And that's where we come in. And whenever we come in, we bring a partner in almost immediately to co-sell with us because, again, we wouldn't be anywhere without that partner network.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's great to share. Dean, can you share maybe what are your most recent success examples? What have you seen? What's in co-selling with your partners or whatever? Have you found anything? As we're, everyone's, saying it's challenging as ever to try to land new clients and onboard. What have you seen anything specifically that you can share that you see is working better than other things that you tried in the past?
Yeah, so we launched a new solution a couple years ago. It's experienced by Kentico, and so this is a new approach to content management, to the buzzword of headless,
yes,
which is indeed a buzzword. So all of that stuff is new, and so it's also new to the partner network. And so really, if I could actually say what the success has been, it's been enablement after enablement after enablement and education around why we made these changes. And we're taking that feedback again from the MVPs of Kentico. And so we are now seeing some significant adoption of experience by Kentico. And so the reason for that is because of a couple of things. Number one, it's the consolidation that I was just referencing before with the multiple different systems. Number two, it's when you get a client that says, I want headless, and you kind of dive in and say, well, what do you mean when you say headless? And they're like, well, I just want to have multi-channel. It's like, well, okay, so we have that, but a truly headless CMS does not give you the front end UI, and you have that heavy reliance on developers. And so are you aware of the amount of work that goes into that? And so we've kind of combined the best of both worlds there because, and I'll be the first one to admit it, I'm not technical. I'm just not. And so if I can do it, marketers can do it because I'm also not a marketer. And so I think it's just a matter of kind of getting that story out, but we are seeing like mass adoption recently of this platform. And it's because we're getting the partner network to really buy into this. And so a lot of those now are still kind of in that implementation and build phase. And there's some cool stuff that goes on with that because, yeah, it's all in one, but there's a lot of different composable portions of it as well, where there's different alternative software solutions that work and pair well with it.
Yes.
That partners like Spinutech can make that magic happen and then provide that to the end client. And so, specific examples, not sure if I'm at liberty to be dropping names, but I can say that we're starting to see some pretty cool projects coming over the finish line.
Yeah. And I love, one of my, I've been taught a million phrases that some I'm more fond of than others, but I repeat a lot of them. But when I learned a couple of years ago, it goes back to the headless is a buzz. But one of the phrases I learned years back was the easy thing to do is what the client asks, but the right thing to do is what the client needs. And, our doors have all been knocking on, we need a headless solution. We need a headless solution. Well, what do you really need? Because a headless solution is going to take a significant amount of software development time. And typically those who start that journey don't realize the depth of what that journey is going to be. And now they can't afford a headless solution. And so what they wanted, they didn't know that the ability to execute that was going to be more complex than we thought the outcome was going to be. And therefore, they didn't need a headless solution, but they thought they did. Mm. And so it's great to hear that you guys have looked to see the buzz that's going on, but the reality of what is really needed, and do what's needed and not necessarily what the client asks. Because we never win that battle when we do what we were told. We win the battle when we did what we had to do, and it helped make a significant improvement in how that organization's operating online. And so, I appreciate that that's the direction. I appreciate that's what you're seeing as successful right now. I think that's amazing from the product development that you guys have been working on. Dean, you mentioned a few moments ago that your discipline of having that me time and then opportunity to have family time, exercise time, and then grind hard from a work perspective. None of that was something you kind of hinted that none of that was something you self-guided yourself to. You had people who helped you see that as some ways to be able to, rise to where you are in your career right now. My journey had a lot of mentors in it. Have you had any mentors in your journey? Are any of those who you're referring to that helped you see how to maybe create this routine that's helped you be so effective?
Yeah. So, throughout those different sales organizations and different, industries that I worked in, I saw some and learned from some really good salespeople. And I also, was around some pretty bad ones. Yes. And so I think there's equal opportunity to learn from both. Yes. And so ultimately, and this might sound a little bit cliche, but at the end of the day, I think my biggest mentor and who I've always looked up to since I was a little boy was my father. Yeah, that's great. He was a tremendous salesman, super successful, never talked about it, ever. You could never get him to talk about it. He was just that type of guy. When he left and he came home, he was dad, he was coach. And you know what? I never really understood or appreciated that until now I'm in that position.
Right, exactly. Yes.
And so, same thing with my mother, honestly. I mean, I have two tremendous parents that raised me to be a respectful, hardworking young man. And I'm no longer a young man, but and to be a good father and to just be a good person. And so, yes, I've learned some very good sales tactics and some professional development from people that I've worked with, and I'm super grateful and appreciative for that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is something that I do enjoy doing, and it provides for my family. But it also allows me to do that stuff with my family and play with my kids and coach their teams and do all of those things. So I would say that that's probably number one.
Yeah, no, you describe your dad very much how you describe your lifestyle too. I mean, it sounds like, while he didn't brag about it or talk much about it, it just seems like, that inspiration he had of you, you've taken every part of the good of that and learned from it and built not only a great career, but sounds like very successful in all elements of your life. And congratulations to you.
Appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you.
Dee, my last question for you today. You mentioned that in the gym you listen to podcasts. My follow-up question to that would be, where do you find your inspiration today? What is it that you find that maybe you could share with the audience that might be inspiring to them?
So I try and find a combination of different things. So there's sales books that I've read. There are mindfulness books that I've read about how the mind works. I've been starting to get more into some of the Buddhism practices and mindset. Also been reading an interesting book from Jocko about just owning everything in the very extreme fashion, which has been very helpful. And ultimately just being some other books that just that really encourage you to be very hard, I wouldn't say hard on yourself, but take a really hard look at yourself And it's really started to form a different relationship I have, say, with some fear or some insecurity stuff. And that has, I've realized that those are just formless energy called thought.
Yes.
And I've been able to kind of work through that. So, I'm trying to make sure that, it's interesting being in the content management. I'm trying to make sure that the content that I personally am taking in is going to be something that's going to be beneficial and useful, that I can apply to all different areas of my life.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, Dean. It's been an amazing story that you shared here for the last 30 minutes or so. We've been talking to Dean Mavrikos from Kentico. Dean, I think there's probably some people might be interested in reaching out to you after they have a chance to experience this podcast. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, just at Dean Mavrikos. And again, as far as Greek last name goes, I don't think that's too bad. So you should be able to figure it out.
Yeah. Dean, thanks so much for being a guest on the Growth Fire podcast. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences and your journey, and we wish you ongoing success with it.
Thank you, Kevin. Again, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.